Hey Shaunak, how you doing? Thanks for sharing this awesome animation. I think it's looking pretty cool. Let's take a look before we start. You have a lot of nice stuff in here. Let's play it through. I always do sound effects for myself. It's pretty cool. Overall, I think you got a lot of nice poses. You got a lot of nice ideas in here. You kind of asked for a couple of anim tips, and there's a couple of moments I could point out. But your biggest question was, you don't find that the weight or size difference between these two is distinguishable enough. And I agree with that. I think there are moments that I would try to improve, but you have a moment or two that are kind of working. I'm very much a realistic animator. So there's things that I would consider that are a little different here. But in general, I think from your stylized approach, you do have some parts that are working pretty well. And I think I can give you some tips on how to kind of make him feel a little bigger in the shot. A little heavier, I should say. So the three kind of main things that we would focus on to try and make a character or an object look bigger are sort of spacing, what I call exaggeration, like the actions themselves, you try to play them out in a little bit more of an exaggerated way. It's not as nimble or as kind of efficient as a smaller person. And then sort of speed, timing, and direction changes. So first one, which is spacing, isn't so, I think for me, it's not so important in this one. Spacing changes would mean that there's still contrast in your action, but the spacing is a little bit more even and a little bit less kind of contrasted than on a smaller character. So things feel a little bit slow-mo, basically. This is kind of more important if the character was really huge, like even if it's just a transformer standing here, and that difference between that and delta, I think that's when you'd want to kind of get some of that spacing stuff. So not super important in this one. I think for a shot like this, I would focus more on exaggeration, which you do have a little bit of it there. But really, I think in yours, it's mostly timing and direction changes. I feel like some things are a little too snappy. So she is like our baseline. Let's just say, we'll say she's like an average size human. And he is supposed to be bigger and heavier. So a lot of these beginning bits are starting to feel a little too fast, a little too reactive for somebody that big. But then you have this moment right here where he backhands her. Boom, boom. And I feel like that's kind of getting towards, for the style you're trying to get, I think that's getting towards something pretty heavy. It's because you're allowing a couple of things to happen. We could always tweak and improve, but you're separating the actions more. That's what I'm calling exaggeration in this case. Boom. You're giving him a pause, a longer wind up, and then boom, which is really great. Things that you could improve, though, are you want to try and avoid, if you can, big spacing changes like this. Anything that's big needs time to change direction. It needs time to gain momentum. And so all of your actions, you'd want to ease out more, which is not a small job on a shot like this. I feel like there'd be a lot of moments you would have to respace and retime on him, and that would pretty much it would affect your choreography on her and how much she's waiting. Right now you have a really good flow, but that is going to change if you do want to try making him heavier in this shot. So to say this exaggeration here, it's pretty cool. But then the way he falls right after, it's a little too snappy. If you kind of track them, they're almost falling at the same time, at the same speed, and you'd want to give him a little bit more ease before he could pick up the space, the speed to hit the ground that quickly. And then he takes a little bit more time to recover. It's really like a general rule across the whole anim. But I'll try to give you a couple more specific examples. We'll break these up into different kind of actions, focusing on beta right now. So this is not too far in my opinion, but you start to ease out of your action, which is pretty good as opposed to that example I just showed you before. But when he starts to push, there's a big spacing change right here. And that I would even that out just a little bit. I feel like it's a little bit too fast. I love that you added this pause here. You might even be able to slow that down a little bit. but it's making you run into a little bit of a mechanics issue where I like the idea of him jumping with some hang time. That definitely will make him feel heavier. But currently, so now I'm flipping it to anim tips here, he's sort of holding in the air too much, and then he accelerates in the air. And this doesn't really make sense mechanically. He would have gained all of his momentum on this push, and it would have followed through to the end. And if you want to kind of add a little bit of hang time, most of the time we only really focus the hang time on the up. So it's up, takes time, and then falls. But the forward motion doesn't usually wait too long. You can definitely play with that when you're going for something a little more cartoony, but I feel like here you push that a little too far, where he's really just holding in the air a little bit too much. He should be drifting forward a bit more so that you can reduce how fast he has to go through here. This is really quick through here. So it's breaking the mechanics a little bit. He would launch himself up and then land. Right now he's launching, waiting, and then zipping forward. So the fact that that's happening is sort of breaking his weight, and the fact that this whole moment generally is a little too fast through here, I would like honestly just slow it down a little bit. And I think that would help him feel heavier. I hope that makes sense. You also, once he does land and he punches, again, the punch is taking a few frames. You don't want it to lose too much of its intensity, but again, this is something I would probably slow down at least a couple of frames. So instead of snap, it feels like boom. And it's hard to act this out. But the difference is very quick. So I'm seeing 3-4 frames of action versus 6-7. Boom. It takes longer to kind of travel through the air, his fist. But going from here to here in such a big distance that you're traveling here, and then you're changing direction very quickly. This at least needs a couple more breakdowns in the middle, in my opinion, to make it feel heavier. So it is about the pacing of the shot. If you want this guy to feel heavier overall, he's going to have to slow down, and the whole shot's going to have to get a little slower. Other examples of the same idea here. If we try to go here, she delivers a super big kick, but there's a huge spacing change on him. That's not enough time for direction change. That's what I'm talking about. So one of the tips we would have is you could try to do a contact frame that's maybe not as intense right now on her, but what you try to avoid is him changing so much. So if this is the last time you kind of see him before he gets hit, the next one would maybe just be him still here, the head, the legs, but there's just a very big bend in his body. And then he would ease out a little bit more, and then he could get to kind of where you're getting, and he could hold there. But that's kind of what's missing right now. Let me turn off my... But that's kind of what I think would help him feel a little heavier, if that makes sense. And then your hang time is cool. But again, this sort of idea that I think you're pushing it a little too far for a guy this size. For her, if you want to be that stylized and snappy and cartoony, I think that's cool. But for him, I would have him drifting just a little bit more so you don't have to accelerate so much to land. You're playing with physics. You're breaking the mechanics a little bit. Like I said, not a huge deal. But I think you're going a little too far if you want to make him feel heavier. Then when he lands, there's a lot of the same stuff here. These are just very big spacing changes. And so you got the right idea with the holds. It's just getting into them needs a little bit more easing, a little bit more time. Boom. This punch too, that's actually pretty great, that punch. But I would probably put the hold a little longer if I could. The other thing is too, is once you start to, here you're starting to get some successful moments here where as he eases out of the antic, you're starting to get a nice ease frame, but then a little too fast in between. Like it's close, but it's not there. I feel like he would take another, maybe at least two frames before he hit the ground. So, and you could still have a very big acceleration right at the end, but it would need a few more frames to get out of it. And then he holds a little longer. That's nice. Similar thing, big change here. It's going to get repetitive, but basically what you want to look for is anytime he comes to a rest, so I would say his main mass. So it's going to be his body, depends on the action, or his arm if that's what's starting the action. But anytime you identify throughout the animation that he's come to a rest, you need to give him enough time to pick up speed again. And there's some moments where it's working and it's pretty close, and there's several moments where it's just a little too fast. That's the other one. Let me keep going for just spacing and timing here. Same thing, I talked about this, the big changes here too. Great poses though, like really cool poses. Although this, again, may be a little exaggerated mechanically. Like you don't really feel him being able to throw his weight forward here. This is something that might start and activate with the chest first, because when you get to this pose, there's no kind of sense of what's holding him up, and he's not in a pose that feels like anything launched him forward. So normally what I think might be is you kind of get to this pose where you're anticing, but then before he can start moving forward, you start to lean him forward. And then by the time he gets to this pose, he's a little more balanced. His arm is still trailing. So you give him time to kind of lean, shift his weight, and then he follows through with the punch. There's kind of moments like that too. A second kind of, so besides going through and kind of paying attention to this, other kind of moment that I think would be helpful is when she's punching him, you definitely like have tried to show a contrast. He punches her. Every time he punches her, she goes very far, very high. Every time she punches him, that's pretty cool. Like the idea that there's a difference there is the right track, but I would probably go even further. Like her punches make him travel even less. Like again, these big changes here, similar thing. It would take more time for parts of the body to change direction. And so overall, he just wouldn't go so far back. Every punch would have less effect on him. It's just much smaller. And the last one pushes him back, but again, could be a little smaller. So that range of motion and all these punches is another way to make him feel bigger. She has powerful attacks. You're selling it with impacts, but it's not enough power behind her to push him that much. And so he wouldn't just travel nearly as far through all of these. And then, of course, all this, like, even though I mentioned the way to get there, this could also be less exaggerated. It just doesn't quite travel as far. That's kind of the general gist of how you could try and make this guy feel better. Again, here, there's a couple of moments right at the end where he starts to kind of just ease a little too much and just big. Sorry, I changed the spacing is a little too big, I should say. It's pretty close though. It's pretty cool. That's the gist of it though. I feel like it's a lot of little tweaks that is going to kind of change your choreography, but that would be a way to sell the weight a bit better. I don't feel like you have to, when I'm telling you to add a couple of frames here, a couple of frames there, you don't have to add 5 or 10. It really is a few frames. And even that contrast might be just enough. You want to kind of play with it just so you have enough of a difference between them, and then you could get kind of what you're hoping to achieve. You don't have to go crazy where he's just lumbering and slow and not very fun to watch. Like, you don't want to lose any of that interest. But yeah, definitely a tweak going through a little bit and slowing him down. As far as Delta Xanim, she's generally really cool. I don't have a ton to say about her. There's a couple of mechanics. So one thing I'm not going to be able to cover in a 15-minute review is all of the arc stuff, like just polishy notes. You do have a couple of arcs that could use a bit of love, but generally, I think you did a pretty great job. But you could always polish stuff up. We could polish stuff up forever. There's no limit to it. Some of the things that stood out to me when I watched her, the first one that really stood out to me was this kind of slide across she does here. I don't feel like it's kind of well, distributed, the energy and the spacing of it. It feels like she's not propelling herself. It feels like she's being pulled, or she's kind of just, there's some, like maybe she needs rocket jets or something. But it doesn't feel like she's moving under her own power. I think one of the reasons is the way you tried to block this in was she pushes off this leg. And I think we need a much more definite push there. You want to get a really strong pose of that leg pushing off so you understand where the force came from. The other thing is her general spacing through that action is a little bit even. If I kind of just track the leading edge of her head, it's a little bit even. Oh, I didn't draw that one super well, but you kind of get the idea. This is pretty even through here. And instead what you want is especially since she's light and you don't have to really worry about that as much, you want sort of a bigger burst at the beginning, and then it starts to slow down. So this is when she's pushing with her legs, so you get a burst of energy and then it slows down. But watching it through the first time, it just feels all a little too even. Let me clean up these drawings. So that's the first thing I would do, add a better push pose, and then try to have the burst at the beginning, and then friction and everything else takes over after, and she starts to slow down in a natural way. That's that one. There's a kind of moment here where he does the ground punch and he knocks her up. And this is somewhere where I might kind of look for ref maybe. But something about, well, ref, you're not going to find somebody getting knocked up, but maybe somebody on a trampoline. Something about her staying in this pose doesn't feel quite right. And I don't have a good answer for you in the moment. But she could still get to this kind of orientation. My gut tells me that she should probably be knocked up. Oh, you have her starting to... There's a couple of little things fighting each other here. There's a couple of little ideas that are fighting. Oh, that's not a big deal with real time. I feel like she should probably get knocked up flatter. So, whoa! And then you maybe could have her turn to spin, like change a little bit of direction in the air. Maybe not quite get so flat, but you would have to kind of block that out, or find some ref of somebody flipping on a trampoline or something that might help. But I feel like this moment kind of needs a bit of love. The other kind of part of this that's not quite working in my mind mechanically is she's kind of getting knocked straight up. You sort of have this indication of her starting to about to run, which I didn't quite read the first time. I saw that real time. But the bigger issue for me is she's sort of getting knocked straight up, but she somehow gets forward energy. Doesn't quite make sense. Like, you need to sort of motivate that, in my opinion, before it takes off. So the first pose, if you really want her to do this and then she gets knocked up, it's got to be here. Like, you want to kind of finish that energy. I don't think it makes sense that it goes like this and then it drifts so much forward. It's a little thing. This is a little tweak. It's not it's a huge deal. But generally, I know I'm over 15 minutes, but I'm going to try and wrap this up. But generally, she's working pretty well. Some things that I think would also help, she's small and she's nimble, but you still want to sell the mechanics of her punching, is she does a nice little kind of antic here and a wind-up as a small tweak note. You could always try to separate that arm a little bit so you could see that better. But you kind of want her force to start traveling before her body goes. Like, you want to just get the sense of her starting the action and then she zips forward. And right now you're sort of losing a lot of the punch because she's zipping forward kind of before the action started. You want to get a frame of at least this starting and then she zips forward, just to sell that a little bit more. Similar thing here. Again, I'm not a fan of this because I do come from realism, but when you want to punch, your body starts before your arms, and I feel like you could make this into a little bit more of an in-between where the arm is still back. I can't draw this really well. Her arm is still back, and then the punch comes through. Right now it's getting kind of muddled and it's already coming through before. So I guess basically what I'm trying to say is you could drag the arm a little bit more before she punches, just to kind of separate those actions. Very similar to what you did here. Here it's a little more successful. She antics, her body goes forward with the arm still dragging, and then the punch comes through. And I would do a passive doing that for every punch, every hit she does. That's the kind of gist of it. Let me just watch it one more time to see if there's any last notes. But overall, she's kind of working, especially for the style I think you're going for. And it's just a lot of small little nitpicky tweaks, which are just tough to cover. Sorry, I'm watching this quietly. Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. I hope that was helpful, and I think it's a really great shot. It's got a lot of cool stuff in there, and you decide if it's worth the time to kind of expand on this and try to push it further. But I feel like even just as an exercise, this is amazing, and she's got a lot of cool ideas in there. So keep it up, and I can't wait to see what you do next.